The whole purpose of this interview series is to just give you the chance to tell your story, share your perspectives with the community, and to also share the work that you've been doing and where you come from. And so I feel like the first question to naturally start is, where are you from? Where are you coming from?
So I'm originally from Mexico City, Mexico.
What was it like growing up in Mexico?
So I really didn't have an upbringing in my native country. My parents brought me to the United States when I was 3 years old. So I'm what you call a generation 1.5 immigrant, since I was born. I was born in a different country, but I didn't technically grow up there. I actually grew up in Northeast Mississippi in a sleepy little town, which was very much an adjustment for my parents, who were from one of the largest cities in the world.
I think Mexico City is actually the largest city in North America, correct?
Yeah, it's definitely the top 5. It's larger than New York. So yeah, it's huge.
Well, I know a lot of people come to America for very different reasons. Some people come because they want to start fresh, do something new. And a lot of people come because they don't really have much of a choice. Some people flee war, they flee climate change, they flee some kind of natural or human-made disaster. And I know you said that you grew up mostly in Northeast Mississippi, but what brought your parents over to America?
So my dad worked for the Mexican government for a while, and he really got tired of the corruption he was seeing. I think he worked somewhere for Social Security claims, and they made him deny a lot of people that actually did have a claim, but because it was corrupt. So he kind of got tired of having to turn down really wonderful people. He ventured out to Los Angeles for a little bit, came back, married my mom, then ventured back out to Texas for a while. And then he got a steady construction job in Mississippi. And by then I was 3, and my parents decided it was a good time to just move the whole family to Mississippi. As for me moving to Louisiana, I moved precisely to get my PhD six years ago. But Louisiana has always been in our heart. Growing up, my parents and I did a lot of family vacations to New Orleans, precisely because it reminded them a lot of Mexico City.
Well, I wanted to ask actually about those similarities. I've heard a lot of people say that there are a lot of similarities to New Orleans, for instance, to a lot of Caribbean and European and even African cities. What do you say are some of the similarities that you or maybe your parents noticed to South Louisiana and Mexico?
And one is the history, right? Mexico also has a lot of Spanish and French influence, very similar to Southeast Louisiana. So you can see it in the architecture of certain buildings, but it's also very much in the culture. There's definitely a similarity in terms of celebrating with family and friends, eating good food, enjoying the moment. All of those things are extremely similar in kind of the way that things are done in Southeast Louisiana, with parades and spending time together and all the different kinds of parties, and also just being with friends and family. It's something that's very, I feel, unique and particular in this region, and it's very similar to Mexican culture. Other areas of the South isn't as Catholic as Southeast Louisiana. So some of those traditions were also very, very similar, and it's very, in a way, very welcoming, and again, very familiar.
I wanted to ask you some questions about your upbringing in Mississippi. I mean, what was that like for you? And maybe what was that like for your parents? Because I know that's one heck of an adjustment to have one kind of life in Mexico and then to have to come to America and have a very different life than what you're used to.
Right. I give so much props to my mom, because, I'm 28 years old, and she came to the United States when she was 30 with a 3-year-old child, and completely separated from family, because in Mississippi, we don't have any blood relatives. So to be completely uprooted from a city life to a rural life with no family around, no friends, with a very small child, I really admire her bravery and resilience for being able to have that adjustment, which now that I'm older and we've talked about, yeah, she did struggle with that, but she pulled through, you know. And also, you know, my dad's never shied away from any kind of job. He's done construction, he's done upholstery, he's worked in a pig farm, he's worked as a cook. So really, I also admire my dad in terms of like really seeing that idea of the American worker, of being able to like really work in whatever settings for the sake of the family. So it was an adjustment for both of them. And then for me, it's always been interesting to kind of live in both worlds, you know? So like I definitely, in the home, I grew up speaking Spanish. We would watch Spanish TV, music in Spanish. So those kinds of family traditions, but I was going to school surrounded by people speaking in English, and like a lot of what, like, I think in English, I speak majority in English, but I have both traditions. And I think part of being bilingual, or like having access to different cultures, it's just an incredibly rich experience, because you get both, but then you also kind of get the mixture of both. And I know that's something that's really cool for other people that are from my generation that are also like bicultural and bilingual, that it's really cool to see, to really be part of multiple worlds. It's a very rich thing.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I think that for me, I always have such value for people who can hold on to their culture, because in many parts of American history, a lot of people have immigrated to the United States to completely erase their cultural identity to fit in and to belong to this America. But I feel as though for younger generations, there is more of a knowledge of wanting to keep their culture, of their it's almost like you're respecting the past because you're wanting to hold on to that culture, your language, where you come from, those traditions. And I feel like that makes younger people, particularly people of our generation, stronger, because we're able to hold on to the past while also still thinking about the future.
Right. And I think that the added layer to that, right, is like growing up in the South, which, you know, I've traveled outside of the Southern region many times. And it's just like the Southern identity and culture, you know, even though I wasn't born in the United States, I grew up in Mississippi, and I'm surrounded by friends and people and loved ones that, you know, I tend to have both of that American but also Southern flavor to it, right? Like, I love drinking sweet tea. I know how to make it. You know, it's like I know how to make that as much as I know how to make horchata, or like the idea of hospitality, and the idea of like making sure that your loved ones are close and well fed is a very Southern kind of idea. But that also like very much complements my Mexican side of also like wanting to make sure that everyone's okay and well fed and happy.
Yeah, I would have to say that perhaps it sounds like you're tricultural as opposed to bicultural, because Southern culture is a very unique culture. I mean, when I was living in New England, I felt more Southern than anything, because I began to realize that even though I left the South didn't leave me. So my desire for hospitality, my passion for food, my passion for people and cultural spaces and just customs and politeness, those stereotypical but also very important things about Southern identity stay with me. I wanted to ask you a question more so about your academic background, because you now have a PhD. You are now Dr. Alejandra Torres. But I wanted to start from the beginning, because I mean, it's a journey to go from being a high school student to an undergrad student to a master's student and to a PhD. Walk me through your journey of going from Alex Torres to Dr. Alex Torres, and how that journey looked for you with the life experiences that you've had.
It's really curious, because like I think about it, I have a brother that's now middle school. Well, technically he's now, you know, a freshman, but you know, I remember wanting to be a doctor in middle school. Like, I've always been such a little nerdlet, and I was like, I want the title, and I just want to keep doing school, you know? But that was just a goal that I had from a very young age. It was a little complicated because I grew up undocumented. So to grow up undocumented means that you don't have a social security number. And if you don't have a social security number, that means that you don't have access to financial aid. And coming from a working class home, it was like, how am I gonna pay for college if I can't get financial aid? So what I ended up doing was going to community college. And originally I was heartbroken about that because all my friends were going to four-year colleges. I felt like there's definitely a stigma against going to community college. But later I came to realize that that's absurd. Like, I am a strong proponent of community colleges because I grew up, I was able to go and graduate debt-free, which in our generation is almost unheard of. It's very uncommon to see people that graduate debt-free, and more so since I was undocumented. So I'm very grateful to the 2 years that I had in community college. Then I was able to transfer to a four-year college to Mississippi University for Women, also largely on scholarships and institutional scholarships. I was able to make sure that I didn't have to take out debts, that even though I wasn't, even though I was a straight A student and had extracurriculars out of the ears, it was just one of those things that if you don't have a social, there's just certain things you don't have access to. But luckily, by the time that I was in my undergrad, DACA came out, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which gives a temporary relief both from deportation and gives you a valid social security number. So that meant that as I was applying to grad school, I was actually going to be able to be legally paid, so that when I was accepted into the English PhD program, I was able to be legally paid to receive my stipend and to waive my tuition there. So again, very fortunate that I was able to graduate with a double major and go into this PhD program. And then, it was during that program that, I had done a lot of volunteer youth work growing up. I did a lot of camps with foster children over the summers. And I was always passionate about working with young people. And I missed that my first year here in Baton Rouge. I really did miss it until I was able to meet Anna West, who is the co-founder of Humanities Amped, along with Destiny Cooper. Anna was writing her dissertation at the time, and it was in ethnography, and it was about young people and how to make schools better for young people. And I did not know that that was an option. I did not know that I could dedicate my dissertation to writing about how to make things better for young people in underserved schools. So I got an internship with Humanities Amped, and while I was at McKinley High, people were telling me, hey, there's an influx of English learners, there's immigrant students that need a lot of help, the teachers don't know what to do with them. And so again, I'm fluent in English and Spanish. I have a teaching English as a second language certification. So I was like, I'll dedicate some time to see what's going on with these students. And it was just mind blowing that these were students that just arrived. They had a few months in the United States. They were teenagers. They just arrived after crossing the border and having to be in a detention center. And here they were, ready to learn English, but nobody knew how to help them. There was not bilingual educators. There were zero resources for them. And of course, the longer they didn't receive the resources they needed, the more their motivation dropped, right? And having grown up, undocumented, I knew all the barriers of college access that way, but I had grown up in the United States, and I was a star student, right? So a lot of things were super easy for me. I spoke English. But here you have these students that didn't. And so I was fascinated by their motivation, and I wanted to figure out how we can help them. So that's how the dissertation came out, was really spending some time with 31 amazing immigrant youth over 3 years to see how exactly do these systems fail them, and how exactly, because these systems failed them, a lot of what happens is they help each other out. So it's a really beautiful story of resiliency, but at the same time, really highlights how messed up both immigration and educational systems are, and how much it really deprives these students from an education that they really do deserve.
Having gone through those experiences, did you feel like you had much more of an edge, not to, for lack of a better word, into helping youth?
In one way, it definitely is a double-edged sword to be a researcher that has similar backgrounds to participants, and mine's a partial similarity, right? So like I'm an immigrant. I also know what it feels like to be undocumented, but like as of January, you know, I've became a citizen, right? What I used to have to worry about, I no longer have to worry about for myself, right? So there's also a lot of what I came to realize was like survivor's guilt in a way, because it was like, great, I made it through, but look at all these wonderful people that haven't. So you also like feel in a very real way indebted to help out. But it's also just like you can't help but feel so helpless sometimes at the magnitude of the systemic injustices, right? And also like things and policies have changed, and there's even more limited access, right? Like the DACA program that applied for me does not apply for my students in this day and age. Also policies such as like the DREAM Act that could help them, again, do not get passed yet. So they're even more so limited, and it becomes very frustrating as someone that's trying to advocate for them and that does have a similar background to them. It can get really, really emotional and really hard.
I've been fortunate to work with some of the youth that you're talking about. And one of the things that I've learned is that if you're if you're an empath, or you're a person that is very empathetic to people, you oftentimes be worn down by seeing them struggle, going through systems of oppression or being criticized or stigmatized, because not only do you feel for them, but you almost see yourself in them. So how do you, I guess, maintain a sense of self-care and strength when you're working with kids in these backgrounds?
And yeah, I also want to take a moment to thank you for the programming that 821 and you have done with some of the immigrant youth, because especially around the concept of global citizenship, that, you know, I as someone that grew up undocumented, I heavily was able to, that the idea of global citizenship always resonated with me. And I think that it also resonated with a lot of my students, and they appreciated those dialogues. And I think that also ties into the self-care aspect. If you're able to visualize yourself as part of something bigger, such as that concept of global citizenship, you're able to like place your struggles within the global context of struggles, and you're able to like feel more self-compassion because you know that you're not alone in those struggles. So thank you for that. And I think another part of like self-care is just really knowing when to take breaks, and to like acknowledge that there are things that you can control and that there are things that you cannot control. But for the things that you can, you give your best with what you're given. But ultimately you have to leave some of that work at home, which sometimes is really hard. And for me, it's been several years of learning how to put up work to home boundaries so that I can be at a better mood and a better emotional state for my students. Because if I'm not taking care of those emotions, then they're going to leak out and have certain consequences that can be detrimental to the people that I'm trying to help out. So like the more calm and centered and grounded that I can be, then the more that I can like help others. And also like I'm a very strong mental health advocate. I've been in therapy for the last 4 years, and seriously, without my therapist, I don't know how I would have been able to finish this dissertation or carry on with the work that I do, because trauma is real and mental health issues are real, and even though some people might not think that they're real, they are. And so it's important to talk about them, and it's important to know that you can reach out for help. So I think all of those are components of trying to stay healthy so that you can continue doing the work.
I wanted to actually ask you a little bit more about the work that you do with the other organizations that you're involved in, because your bio says that you not only work with Humanities Amped, but you also work with several other organizations: the Louisiana Organization for Refugees and Immigrants, the ICARE Advisory Board, and the Baton Rouge Immigrant Rights Coalition. So how did you get involved with those different organizations?
So with the ICARE Advisory Board, I was able to come on with that through another teacher at EBR. And really what ICARE does is prevention work, especially about drugs, but also suicide, and they're moving more towards mental health, right? And I think that's something that has severely spoken to me, because I've had a couple of students that have tried to commit suicide, immigrant students that just because they felt overwhelmed and they didn't feel like they could have help, they felt that they felt like they wanted to end their life. Luckily, they were both able to be in a way that it didn't happen. It was prevented, but both were hospitalized because they did try. So I think that kind of preventative work is really crucial. And the more that we can help, young people realize their worth and try to get them the help they need is really critical. As for Lori and the Baton Rouge Immigrant Rights Coalition, Lori does more of the on-the-ground kind of work. They really are working with like the communities that we have immigrants from Africa and some from Latin America and others to really see what the needs are in the community, and they try to address it. Now, in terms of the Baton Rouge Immigrant Rights Coalition, it's a coalition. So it's an organization for organizations that are interested in helping immigrants. So it's more like organizing. I think that right now we've really, with Baton Rouge Immigrant Rights Coalition, have been trying to end the 287G agreement, which is an agreement that the EBR Sheriff's Office has with ICE, which again, having an agreement with ICE saying that, yeah, it's cool that you can come into our neighborhoods. Some people spin it as a good thing, but it's not. Lots of students and lots of families are terrified that they will be deported or they will be separated. So ending that agreement is very important. Also, for Christmas, we did a Christmas card drive and stamps, so that people in detention centers could send holiday cards to their families. So that's more of the coalition kind of work that's done there.
That is amazing work. I mean, it seems like immigration naturally is an important topic that you focus on. But I also know that when you're doing work with immigration, which is such a very hot topic, a lot of people have very polarizing opinions. Very few people, in my circle, are indifferent. Like, they're like, oh, okay. There are people who are either like, yeah, immigrants are awesome, da, 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 da. Or you have people that are just like, no, they need to leave. People that have very polarizing opinions. And I also know that Louisiana is inarguably a very conservative state. So when you're trying to do work regarding, immigration, you do have a lot of resistance. So what are some challenges that you've had to face in educating people about the immigrant experience and also doing the advocacy work that you do?
I think, yeah, I think you really contextualize it super well in terms that it is, for some reason, such a political hot topic. And with sometimes you just can't argue with certain people that think a certain way without exhausting yourself. But it really has been surprising, if I can speak frankly, that the current sheriff thinks that the 287G agreement is a good thing, that it helps immigrants, is still something that I sit and think about most days, of like, the community is telling you to end it and you think this is a beneficial thing. So again, politics have to be tied with that, right? And I think that a lot of people just really don't realize, and I think maybe that the pandemic has helped some people realize that certain jobs are essential, right? Like the things that we had been referring to as low skilled is actually essential, and those are the jobs that immigrants largely do. Like, not everybody wants to be in the fields or plucking chickens or in the heat of construction. Not a lot of people want to be doing that, but that's essential work that keeps that keeps our country moving forward. And if we don't have people in meat packing plants or in the fields or in construction, then we can't move forward. So yeah, I try to talk with the people that I can, but sometimes you just have to acknowledge that this topic falls on deaf ears, and some people just can't recognize the humanity of other people. And sometimes I'm just like, if you can't recognize the humanity and the worth of this person, then I don't know what I can possibly say to change your mind.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have very negative opinions about immigrants just being in America. And I wonder how much of that comes from a lack of education, because I was very fortunate to be raised as someone who respected people and respected culture and affirmed culture. So you don't just be polite and politically correct when you're dealing with people. You also humanize people's existence, because I was raised to respect people, but I was also someone who experienced being bullied, being teased, being stigmatized, and also being an African American, being a minority. So I'm very much able to understand and connect with people who come from other marginalized backgrounds. But for many people, they sometimes, I wonder if maybe they see someone who's different from them, and instead of being curious and wanting to learn more, they simply try and find ways to squash difference, or to erase difference, or to try and diminish difference in many different ways, and how much that hurts us as a society and also as a community.
Right, exactly. And I think I'm totally borrowing this analogy from other people, but it's the analogy of gumbo, in Louisiana, right? Like, you don't want just two ingredients, and you want the variety of what different people have to bring, right? So it's very sad when you realize that some people just don't see it, see the value of other people and the value that diversity brings.
So with all the things that you're involved with working with youth, specifically immigrant youth. You're involved in a community with immigrant advocacy. Those are all some things that can help to make people more aware of social injustice, and it can also help people to be more educated on other people's experiences. But another thing the work that you do, it sounds like, it also helps to build community. What are some ways that you build community in your own life outside of the work that you do?
I think it's very interesting because my position is to be, like, at Humanities Amped, is community engagement director. But a lot of the events that I do with Humanities Amped is also a lot of people that are in my friend group. I think I've gravitated towards a lot of loved ones in Baton Rouge that are also interested in community and in social justice and making things better, right? So it really is a privilege that not only has, like, Humanities Amped been able to, like, collaborate with 821, but, like, you and I also have a friend relationship, and I see that also with volunteers that I'm able to call on for Humanities Amped are also people that I hang out with on a weekend, right? So I think also that, the center of being able to do quality work is relationships. So if you have quality relationships, then you can also do, like, quality work. So it's nice to be able to have people in my life that are aligned with social justice and that are aligned with making things better. So I think that's also why I like Baton Rouge.
Also, Baton Rouge is a place that is constantly growing and evolving. So in many ways, it's also a place that is ripe for social justice. I think Baton Rouge is a place where, you know, things are kind of new in terms of social justice and global citizenship in a contemporary setting. Now, social justice is not new to Baton Rouge. I mean, we had the earlier bus boycotts back in the 50s, and we also have had several civil rights movement events take place in Baton Rouge. And many of the organizers that I've gotten to know have been doing this work before I was even born and thought of, but also in many ways, a more global, cosmopolitan, intercultural social justice movement is not something that has been present recently, maybe until the last, I would have to say last decade, in terms of, yes, we are working to make our community better, but we also need to recognize that Baton Rouge is connected to so many other parts of the world beyond the I-10 or just the state of Louisiana.
I think that with the struggle for injustice in Baton Rouge has largely, what has been at the forefront has been Black and white issues and the injustices that sometimes come from that struggle. And now, precisely, in the last 10 years or so, like now that we have a larger influx of immigrants, especially those from Central America, like we now also have to contend with that. And what happens often with like immigrant communities is that they're able to like become invisible for safety's sake. But that doesn't mean that there's needs there that need to be met. And I think that currently there has been some moves into trying to make those populations more visible, right? We see these different groups becoming a lot more organized, like Lori or the Baton Rouge Immigrant Rights Coalition. We also see the mayor's office establishing an international commission as well. So you start seeing moves, right? So I think it's important that those moves are being made, but even more so what's going to become important is to make sure that the voice of the other populations is being heard and that they're not being tokenized. Because again, that's always the risk in kind of, you know, diversity efforts is that, oh, we have this diversity effort, so therefore we can't be racist or we can't be xenophobic. But if you're not actively making sure that these voices are being represented and that their suggestions are actually becoming policy, then it's just being tokenized. So it's gonna be, I'm excited to see what comes next, but also wary to make sure that what happens next is very crucial.
Another thing that I've noticed is just this idea of intersectionality is becoming more present in a lot of organizations, because oftentimes when organizing work is done, it's done from the perspective of one identity. Like, oh, we're focusing on race right now. Oh, we're focusing on gender right now. We're focusing on immigration right now, not realizing that, for example, the immigrant experience differs. I mean, an immigrant who comes from Belgium is not going to have the same experience as someone who comes from Honduras. Mm-hmm. And someone who comes here because they're an international student, or they come as someone with a lot of money and they go from one job to the next, is not the same as someone who in their country may have been a doctor or a physician, and because of not being able to be certified with their medical degree now is a taxi driver or a janitor because they can't get a job as a doctor, even though they are trained as a doctor. And so the intersectionality of different experiences have to be recognized as well. I wanted to ask you a couple more questions before we conclude the interview. The first question I wanted to ask you about was this idea of being a community organizer and a leader, such as yourself in Louisiana. And obviously you're doing the work, you're on the ground, but you also are having a lot of challenges because you're dealing with the complexities of a community, and you're also dealing with other challenges of just trying to dismantle systems that may oftentimes weigh people down. But what do you feel needs to be done to make Louisiana, and specifically our region of Southeast Louisiana, a more inclusive and welcoming place for people?
I think it's gonna take, you know, a lot of collaboration in terms of dismantling certain systems, like you just rightfully said, in terms of intersectionality, what that happens, right? So like in order for people to be included, that also just means that everybody's basic human needs need to be met first as well, so like everyone should have access to work with that's dignified, and that they have a wage that where they can pay their bills and meet their needs. I think this pandemic showed how fragile life is for people that live paycheck to paycheck, for people that don't have access to healthcare, to internet, to transportation, to fresh food, to stable housing. Again, these are basic human needs that aren't being met for a lot of people across the board, whether or not they're immigrant or they're native, whether they're undocumented or have documentation to be here. So I think it's terms of like, once everyone is able to prosper, then hopefully we can shift from this scarcity framework where people might act a certain way to other groups because they feel like, oh, I have to get mine, and in order to get mine, you can't have yours. So this idea that there's not enough, and that's why you have to fight with other people, especially if they look different than you or they come from a different place, because y'all are competing over the same thing. That's a scarcity myth, right? Like we know that we live in a country where a very small percent holds the majority of the riches. So it's that shift to make sure that for people to feel included, we either have to realize that we're fighting the wrong people, that immigrants, Black people, poor white people, like there's very similar struggles, and maybe we're not looking at the right people to hold accountable about why we can't have a better quality life. So I think in order for there to be more solidarity and inclusivity, we really have to examine what and who is really keeping us or feeding us these lies that we have to hate each other, or that we have to exclude each other, or that we have to build a wall, or that we have to keep kids in cages. Why are certain people telling us these things, as opposed to all of us realizing we're in a similar situation?
And with that in mind, you work with young people. What role do you feel young people can play in implementing and carrying on some of the things that you've brought up?
Yeah, I think that's why I love being an educator, and I love working with young people, because they still have these questions, right? Like they really have these questions of like, why is the world like this? And I think it's our responsibility as educators to not give them just what is in a very Eurocentric, very whitewashed history of the United States. Like, we have to account for all of the injustices that have occurred in this country since its inception. Like, this is stolen land. It was made on genocide of Indigenous people and Black people, and it's been exploiting immigrants as well. So we have to come at an education that's critical of that past, is aware of that past, and is willing to start making moves to change that, and to hold people accountable for systems that keep exploiting the marginalized. I think that working with young people is incredibly rewarding, because they can be the current leaders and the future leaders to start really changing things. And it's up to adults to both give them the support they need, but also, when the time comes, to get out of their way.
My only concern is whether or not they're being heard. How do you combat adultism and ageism that the young people you work with may experience? And also, you're not in your 30s yet. So like, how do you deal with the ageism that you may experience, as a young professional or a young community organizer?
Right. And all of these things are intersectional, going back, right? So it's just not that some of these young people are young, but it's like they're young and Black, or young and immigrant, or young and female, right? And so that even all those other biases play a part. And I think consistency is key, and knowing your own value is key. And also knowing to call it what it is. Adultism, right, is this idea that adults know better just because they're older. And it completely negates like the wisdom of all the experiences that young people have, right? And their perceptions and their perspectives that can be incredibly insightful. So I think it's important to have a lot of youth workers to know the value of young people, right? And I think that there's a lot of youth-based organizations in Baton Rouge that really do see the value of young people, their voices, and are investing in them. So I would definitely like to see that even more. But on a personal level, it is a question of like, I know my worth, and unlike other intersectionality points, the thing that is interesting about age is that you do grow out of it. So this will be a point, like adultism, I will grow out of it, right? There will be a point where people like, are like, oh, okay, she's older now. But it's still when it's happening, it's like, knowing your worth and knowing that your voice matters. And likewise, whenever you're given opportunities to pivot and give that space to younger people, then that's crucial to also model to other adults what it looks like to give young people that space to talk.
And I'm also thinking about having more education about the difference between age and generational identity, because a lot of times people conflate, oh, well, you're young, so you don't know what you're talking about, not realizing that you being 20 in your 20s in the 1970s is very different from somebody being in their 20s in the 90s, and then somebody being in their 20s right now at this moment. So the world is different, the world changes. So sometimes you have to sit and listen to people who are younger or older than you to understand that they have certain pieces of the puzzle that are missing from yours.
Exactly. So like intergenerational work is really what's key. And I think that's what I also like find so appealing about working with Humanities Amped, is that we want to use intergenerational approaches. We want to make sure that young people are, and their voices are centered. And we also want to make sure that the adults that we're working with share that same philosophy, that, you know, we have to center young people and their voices.
Not only center, but also amplify. Everybody has a voice, but sometimes the volume needs to be turned up a little bit more on certain voices and turned down on other voices. I really admire the work that you're doing. I admire your journey and I admire your story, but I also know that we're very complex people. What is something that you want people to know about you, Alex, that you feel is most important? Like, what is that thing that you want someone to see you as when they see you as a person?
When they see me, I want them to recognize my humanity, right? Like, I want people to know that I'm human and that I have good days and I have bad days, and that, you know, I'm trying the best that I can to just stay happy and also continue to do the work that I feel called to do. So I really think that, you know, as long as we're centering people's humanity and really, really knowing what that means, you know, then we're on a better track to be able to make sure that everybody's needs are met.
Definitely agree with that. And I really resonate with this idea of seeing your humanity, because sometimes we get so caught up in our rat race, which I think is one of the things that the pandemic has kind of forced us to kind of come to terms with, the idea that we are humans and that we should not be living to work, and we should not simply be working to live. You know, we need more for ourselves, because when things like this happen, we may not have a job. We may not have any way to take care of ourselves. We are still important. We still matter. Our existence is still very much important. And also, during a time such as a global health crisis, I'm also thinking about the fact that in the last couple of days, we've had several instances in which there have been, you know, police violence against, you know, African Americans, and how that's one of the last things that, you know, people of color should be worrying about right now during a global health pandemic, whether or not they won't be able to feel safe at a traffic stop, or, you know, if somebody calls 911 on them, will it be like a death, that them signing their own death warrant or something. You know, like in many ways, we should always remember our humanity and remember that we are all important and we all matter and our existence matters. And that's just the whole point of this interview series, to show not only how diverse, you know, Louisiana is and how woke, quote unquote, Louisiana is, but also to show how broad and complex our humanity is as Louisiana citizens and residents. So Alex, I thank you so much for participating in the interview. I enjoyed talking to you. I'm glad that you were able to share openly about your story, the work that you do in the community. And I hope that you are all able to take care of yourself during this pandemic and during this crisis. And you're also able to continue to touch the lives of young people now and as long as you continue to do this.
Thank you so much for having me on. And also, I hope you continue to do this wonderful and much needed work.